on camera.
Today's June 22nd, 2021. We're at the Atlanta History Center in Atlanta, Georgia. My name's Joe Bruckner. I'm a volunteer at the History Center. And with me today is Frank Luton, who is also a volunteer, and Sue Verhoff, who is the Director of Oral History and Genealogy at the History Center. We're honored to have with us today Mr. Robert Ledford, commonly called Bob, right?
That's right.
Mr. Ledford is a veteran of the U.S. Army, and he's agreed to come and talk to us about his life and specifically about his military experiences. Mr. Ledford served for over 20 years in the Army, and we really appreciate you coming in, Mr. Ledford. Could you give us your full name, where and when you were born?
My name is Robert Brian Ledford. Robert for one grandfather and Brian for the other.
Okay.
I was born December the 4th, 1948 in Marshall County, Tennessee, in a little town called Lewisburg. It's between Shelbyville and Columbia and about 60 miles south of Nashville.
Okay. And what city and state do you live in now?
I live in Dunwoody, Georgia, about a mile and a half from the grandkids.
Okay.
So that's the reason we're there.
Yeah. That's a good reason. Tell us a little bit about your upbringing.
Well, Middle Tennessee is the Great Basin, God's country, and it's a rural. It was all farming. There was one plant in town, and that's where all the men worked that weren't farmers. And if I hadn't joined the Army, I'm sure I would have been there because both my brothers worked there for years and years and years. It's just a great place to grow up. Small country schools. I actually didn't live in Lewisburg. I lived in Verona and Mooresville, which are on the outside. Buford Ellington, the governor, grew up in Verona, one of the governors of Tennessee. Okay. It was 2 churches and a store. Mooresville, we lived, don't laugh when I tell you this, we lived in Pickens Hollow. It was, up in the, my grandfather had a 300-acre farm. So his son, Tyson, my father, bought a little farm down the road. So he worked in the Howe Quaker, making stoves during the 50s and 60s. Came home from work one day with a bunch of his fingers cut off from this, making, it was a rough factory job. And then when he wasn't working the factory, he'd work the farm. Okay. He married my mother, I guess, in '47. I was the oldest. I had two brothers, David and Tim, and a sister, Lanny. That was, and we were all, you can't tell now, we were all redheaded, redheaded with freckles. And, but my grandfather, which I have a picture here, from World War II, World War I, he was in the Old Hickory Division. He went through the war, got gassed, came back, and he was never exactly right. He was always anxieties and things like that. And in the 50s, he, shot and killed himself. When my father and a hired man, they were out hunting, he went back in the kitchen and shot and killed himself. So that unbalanced my father completely. And he would beat my mother, run off. And then he would come back, say, I'm sorry, and we'll try to work it out. Start beating her again, run off. And then, so finally, my mother and his mother tried to reason with him, and they got him to go to Nashville to one of these clinics back then, asylums, I guess, in the 50s. And he jumped the fence and never went back again. And so he would run off to Denver and live there, come home for Christmas. Finally, my mother just said, that's it. We can't take that anymore. So she divorced him in the 60s. And then, she divorced him in the 60s. We went to live with my grandparents in Verona. And, they were Christians and everything. It wasn't just a word they used. They took my mother in with 4 kids.
Wow.
And we grew up from the I was in there. I lived with my grandparents on a farm. They had a nice farm, about 150 acres. And, you know, it was the farming life. Go to school, farming life, go to school. And we had to walk uphill both ways, you know, that joke. But then but I was not a good student. I just did enough to get by. But I had a great set of parents. My mother worked. You know, she had 4 kids. She had to work.
Yeah.
She worked in a bank, worked, you know, hard jobs, worked in a Kroger's. So my grandparents, they raised all 4 of us. And then I graduated high school. I just found my grades the other day, C, you know. I was not a good student.
Yeah.
But they wanted me to go to college, and my mother, back in the 60s, college didn't cost like it is now.
Yeah.
It was a few $100s, and you had to have $15 a week for food. It was in so I graduated high school in '67, went straight to college that summer, Middle Tennessee State University in Murfreesboro. I wanted to be a history teacher. I loved history books. When I was a kid, I would read all the Peloponnesian War, the Greeks, and all that. I enjoyed it, you know, reading those history books. And I thought I wanted to teach history. Well, I went to Murfreesboro, and one of the things you had to do back then in the 60s, you had to be an ROTC. So I joined that summer, and 1 year later, I had already finished 2 years of the ROTC program that you had to do. And of course, I sort of excelled in that and history. The problem was in algebra and the sciences, I just didn't do any good because my background, I just wasn't interested in it. So I hate to say this out loud, I was failing out. You know, it was getting ready to be May. And I knew I was getting ready to probably fail out of school, but I didn't want to go back home and be a farmer. Or work in that factory.
Yeah.
Just had no desire to do that. So I thought, well, what could I do, you know? And I just thought about joining the military. The Vietnam War was hot and heavy. In February of '68, they had the Tet Offensive. We sort of got, you know, we got knocked back. And I thought, well, maybe I can do something, you know what I mean? You know, I thought I wasn't bad in ROTC, so I really thought I could do something. And so I hitchhiked to Nashville, back then when you could hitchhike somewhere, you know, and got to the recruiting office, and they did all kind of tests, you know, to see I wanted to be an MP. That's what I thought, you know. Well, it won't be combat. Maybe I'll just be an MP, and see what would happen to me after I finished. Well, I got this sergeant came and got me after I'd done all the tests, and he says, "Do you know anything about the Army Security Agency?" Nope, never heard of it. He says, "They have a top secret clearance." Oh, I said, wow, you got to get a top secret clearance. And he says, yeah, but we can't talk about it. Oh, geez. You know, he's fishing. You know, he's got me on the hook. And he says, you get a top secret clearance. Oh, yeah. They don't have the A.S.A. in Vietnam. I said, yeah, that sounds great. He said, well, there's only just one tiny little problem. You have to sign up for 4 years instead of 3. And right then I should have just run, but I didn't. You know what I mean? I was young, and I thought, top secret clearance, this is special, you know. He said, you'll be in school for a year before you go overseas. And I said, yeah, that sounds great. I'll give that a try. 4 years, I signed up. And then, so I go back home, tell my mother. She's crying because, you know, this is, you know, not a good time to go in the military. We're at a war, the height of the Vietnam War, thousands of people over there. But I said, Mama, you know, they said there's no A.S.A. in Vietnam. I said, it's fine. So they put me on a train to Fort Devens, Massachusetts. And of course I got there and I had my basic at Fort Jackson, South Carolina in June, July, and August. they take pictures of me with the Army glasses, the black Army glasses. I weighed 155 pounds of sweat, because that's what it was like in June, July, and August. Marching up, down Tank Hill, you know what I mean? But because I had ROTC, they made me the platoon guide. And so I had a platoon of about 150 Puerto Ricans that I couldn't speak the, it was just that time they were drafting everybody.
Yeah.
So a lot of the troops were Puerto Ricans. I learned how to say one word, Mira. Come here, Mira. And the other one was mañana, tomorrow. That was a joke, but, but it was like that. But I made PFC out of basic training because I had ROTC. That was the only thing that helped me. So they put me on a train to Fort Devens, Massachusetts. And I'd never been north of Kentucky, you know what I mean? So that was a real experience. And of course I met a girl on the train that she wrote me for a few years, because I was going to Vietnam. But I get to Fort Devens and I'm in Boston waiting to and it's in let me think, maybe it's in the summertime, I can't really remember. But I go into a restaurant and waitress says, "You want some tea?" Tea. Yeah. I'd like to have some tea. Thinking it's going to be iced tea, she brings out a cup of tea. This is Massachusetts. And there's a soda. You know what they call a soda up there? Tonic. Fraps or So Boston was like Massachusetts is like another world to a young boy from Tennessee. But then I get to Fort Devens, and basically I had signed up for something that I really didn't know what it was going to be. But they teach Morse code. That was the first thing. Morse code is something I had never thought about. I was never a Boy Scout, never thought anything about it. But the enemy. Back then, when they communicated, there was not a lot of. There was landline teletypes, but most all the enemy they all do that, sending Morse code. But of course, you can't do just slow Morse code. You've got to get to a speed, and it's basically they wanted you to get to 35 words per minute. And if you ever listen to Morse code, so for about the first 6 or 8 weeks, we sit into a big room. And there's about 30 guys in there. There's no women, and they have something called a typewriter, but we don't call it a typewriter. There's no shiftings on it. There's no caps, and it's called a mill. We call it a mill. Big old typewriter, and you just sit there. Did-ah, hit A. Da-did-did-did, hit B. Did-da, did hit C. And you learn. You start out like 5 words a minute, 10 words a minute. People are picking typewriters and throwing them out the window and screaming, "I can't do this, I can't do this." Well, it really washes. Some people just can't do it, but I guess I had that something in those tests they gave me showed I had an aptitude to do that. So finally, when you start getting up to speed, you just can't believe how fast and you're behind. When you hear the code, then you've got to process it at the right key, but the code is still going. So you've got to learn a rhythm, how to keep up with it, to get there. So we learned that. So eventually, somewhere along the line, I'd reached my peak, how fast I was going to be and like that. And they had the one MOS was called 05H, High Speed Morse Intercept. So guys could do it. They could go to Cuba. The Cubans go, they could go to Alaska and listen to the Russians. All over the world, we had these people copying code because that's what everybody was using back then. Well, at a certain point, they said, well, you guys are going to be high speed. And you guys, where you're not as good, but you're going to be, don't laugh when I say this, special identifications technique operators. That's what I was. I was a special identifications techniques operator, and it's right here on my diploma. And it was what they call an 05D. And I'll try to explain what an 05D did. Okay. So, you're out in the field, and you're copying this code, and real fast. and you say, well, I wonder where this guy's at. So how can you're just hearing the code, well, where is the guy? Yeah. So what they would do, they would send the code to us in another place, and we would copy the code, and we would listen in this ear. Then we'd have another receiver over here. We'd put them together so it'd be the same guy. What the guy we're listening here and what the guy we're listening here. Then we had a round scope, 360 degrees, the little notches, right? So when the code comes in, dit, dit, da, this little arrow would go, bing, dit, 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 da, dit, 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 da, dit. So you would see the arrow. Oh, that arrow's pointing at 190. Well, that says, so you're putting that on a map and says, well, it's that way. Well, guess what? We had another outstation, say 100 miles, 300 miles over here. He's listening to the same guy. But his arrow points at 220. And then we have another, well, I'll tell you where we had them. We were in Phu Bai, Vietnam. We had outstations in Udor, Thailand, Ubon, Thailand, Chitose in Japan. We had outstations in Saigon. So all these people are listening, right? And where all the arrows crossed, that's where the enemy's at.
Oh, okay. Wow.
He's in this one grid square, Yeah. So when he turns off the radio and moves 100 miles, turns it back on, and he's using the same call signs maybe, you've tracked that unit.
Wow.
You know what I mean? You've tracked it.
Yeah.
And so that was our big thing. Now, after we did it, because a one grid square is pretty big, they had people fly over with a little airplane, a Beechcraft or something like that. They would have an antenna on each field, on each wing, and they would fly over, and they could say, he's in that bush, just that close. They would fly back and forth over.
Yeah.
So we would try. I had daily contact. This is the joke. I had daily contact with the enemy all the time on the headphones.
Yeah. Well.
If y'all are waiting for the story how I charged the enemy and things like that, I didn't do that.
But what you did was a big part.
Right. I can't show you. I can't get to it quick enough probably. But I got a Bronze Star for that, for meritorious.
Okay.
From the 101st Airborne.
Wow.
Because what we did was track units for the 101st Airborne, and knowing where the enemy's at, that's 90% of it. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Where the headquarters are, where their battalions and whatever are. That's a big deal.
Yeah.
And so I got a Bronze Star from the 101st Airborne, and I wasn't in the 101st. I guess we did something that they liked.
But you sure helped them.
Yeah. And so I would like to tell you that what we did was exciting. It was 12-hour shifts. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
We had what we call tricks. You were on the day, the mid, or the eves. Day was like, let's say, from 8 to 4, 4 to midnight, midnight to that. But a lot of times you were on 12 hours because you were always short of people.
Yeah.
So, and then if you weren't on if you weren't on shift, you had to go out on the bunkers and guard duty.
Yeah.
Because people were out there that didn't like us. You know what I mean? So you had a lot of guard duty, and a lot of trick work.
Well, this is really interesting because I'm not sure we've interviewed anybody that was involved in what you were involved in.
There are two kinds of intelligence. I'll bring this up.
Yeah.
Human intelligence and signal intelligence.
Yeah.
Human is when you capture somebody and ask them questions or spy or things like that. This is the enemy putting things out on the air that anybody can pick up, but they're encrypted. So you've got to use everything, all the tools. That's what the Army Security Agency did.
Yeah.
There was an Air Force Security Agency. There was a Navy Security Agency. We all worked under the NSA, the National Security Agency. Yeah. But this was the military arm of that back then. The A.S.A. was alive from 1945 to 1974. Then they got rid of it and turned it into INSCOM, which is the Intelligence Security Command or something. There's no more A.S.A. It's all gone now in the 70s.
Okay. Let me go back to some of your activities that led up to this. before you went into the service, you were getting ready to go into your training, did your friends have any reaction when you would tell them you're going into the Army, or again, 68?
People sort of looked at you a little funny because people were getting drafted then too, you know, and that was a different thing.
Yeah.
If you got drafted, you were a U.S. I was an RA 1296777. I guess you've heard that before.
Yeah.
Now they use your Social Security number, but actually they've got away from that. They give you different numbers now. But when I went back, people thought it was a little odd because why would you go in now? We're at war, you know what I mean?
Yeah.
Why? But then if I said, well, I don't want to work in the factory, or I don't want to, a lot of people never left Marshall County, you know what I mean? They stay around. Unless to go to college, there's not much reason to stay in Marshall County.
Yeah. Well, you know, all your experiences probably used while you were in the Army, all your life experiences. Did your grandfather ever talk about his experiences?
No, he didn't at all.
Okay.
The World War I, well, I was only 6 years old before he died.
Oh, okay.
So I didn't know that.
Okay.
I didn't know much about it. He didn't talk to me much about it. My uncle was in the Pacific, you know, as a mechanic. He told me stories about at the end of the war they pushed Jeeps off the end, brand new ones, because they weren't going to bring them home, you know, that kind of thing.
Yeah. Okay.
But he wasn't in any combat.
Right.
So I'd never had much anybody that talked about it. It was just, you know, you were a cowboy or an Indian, or you were in the Army when you were growing up, you know what I mean?
Yeah.
And by going to college, I'd seen a little bit more, and I just didn't want to go back to a small country town.
Yeah. Is there anything else you want to say about your training? I mean, you've done a good job of explaining some of what you did.
Well, after Fort Devens, you know, after we finished that school, we got sent to Petaluma, California. It was a place called Two Rock Ranch. And, but that's the funny thing. You know, remember I told you there's no A.S.A. in Vietnam?
Yeah.
They changed the name. I was in the 8th Radio Research Field Station because what they did, we were supposed to be secret. We weren't in Vietnam. We had been there since 1961. One of the first guys killed in Vietnam was a guy named Davis. You can look it up. He was an 05D, was riding in a Jeep with 2 Vietnamese, and he got killed. And that was around 61. And he's one of the first ones they counted because he wasn't a special forces spook or something He was a regular soldier, and he was killed.
Interesting.
Now, there wasn't many A.S.A. people killed because we didn't do that. They either crashed in a plane because they were flying, as I said, or they just got bad luck.
Yeah.
We had a few guys kill themselves, you know, because it was stressful work, and it was. But other than that, we weren't in danger.
Okay.
You know what I mean? But we went to Two Rock Ranch, California, to listen to Morse code from Cambodia, Laos, Vietnamese police, different kind of Morse code, because you just can't. But everybody over there used Morse code to and you had to know what you were listening to, so you wouldn't be copying something that was not what you were supposed to.
Yeah. Wow.
And the Morse code it sounded like somebody scratching on a tin can, and you're supposed to be able to learn that. We spent 2 or 3 weeks there listening to that, but it was great duty. California was in the 60s, so we got to sample that. But then we ended up in Oakland, California, and then the reality set in that you're going to Vietnam.
When you got to Vietnam and you got off the plane, what was your first reaction when you looked out?
Dirty. It was a dirty country. It was all messed up, what I mean? Now pretty green and all that. Of course, we landed in LBJ, the Long Binh. You've heard the word Long Binh jail, We landed there. One of the things I saw that I thought was sort of odd, we were riding along the road, and I would see these guys sitting on the side of the road, and they had these plastic jugs full of this liquid. I said, what are they doing? I couldn't figure it out. they were selling gasoline. The motorcycle would pull up. They'd take the jug and pour it in and, you know, get money from these people. Everybody was riding motorcycles. There was hardly any cars, you know. You know, it was just different.
Yeah.
And then everybody, you know, a lot of the people, they were always trying to scam or figure out some way to get the, you know, the military pay certificates, the little paper money. They're always trying to figure out a way to make money. You know, they were poor, just poor, and almost all of them were scrambling to do that, just trying to survive in a war-torn country. You know, so, but from a young boy from Tennessee, I look at pictures now, and I think I was a man, but I'm just a young boy, really.
Yeah.
I was 20 when I got there, turned 21 in Vietnam.
Okay. Well, talk about your experience in Vietnam, what you did, what you saw, any interaction you had with the Vietnamese, just anything you'd like to share.
I wish I had a good war story. But, you know.
And war stories are not necessarily combat.
I know. Well, with the Vietnamese, they were just poor. Everybody was scrambling to make a dollar. You know, if you went downtown, you know, there was not much town to go to in Phu Bai. Phu Bai had been there so long, you know what I mean?
Yeah.
All of the 60s, and I was there 69 to 70, so that place had been there for 10 years.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? Just started out little, just kept building up, bring another unit in, bring another unit in. It was like a mini city. As a matter of fact, you could come out of our post, walk down the street, and you'd smell bread. I said, what the heck is this? They had a Navy bakery where all they did was make loaves of bread, you know what I mean? It was so odd, out in the middle of nowhere. And then I found out later you could stop at a club and drink till you're, you know, half polluted, walk back, get you a loaf of bread, and, you know, it was just another story. Yeah. Guard duty was monotonous and scary, you know what I mean? It was, you're in the dark, and in front of you, you have a claymore, and a barrel of gas in front of that, they call that foo gas. And you're supposed to, if the enemy was attacking, you're supposed to blow that thing up, and it would blow that. And I said, could I do that? You know, could I really do that to somebody? You know what I mean?
Talk about what a claymore is, because some people watching this may not know what it does.
Well, it's just a, you know, it's a claymore. I can't remember the nomenclature for it, but it's a little curved disc of plastic. It's all it is plastic. And of course, what it says, front to the enemy, that's the joke you see on the thing. Front to they'll have a mast, they'll have front to the enemy. And what it was, it's 1,000 little steel balls inside of this. It's a plastic explosive inside with steel balls, all, you know, all lined up towards the enemy. And then you run the wire back to where you're at, and you have a little clicker. And at night, if you thought somebody was crawling through the wire, you could, you know, and you would have 2 or 3 of them pointing in different directions. Yeah. But the dirty thing they did where we were is they put a barrel of this called jellified gasoline, food gas. They would put that in front of the claymore, so if it was, it would be nasty. It would be just burning jellified gas up on the enemy. Yeah. So that's for a young guy, 20 years old, thinking to do that, it's really scary. Yeah. And then you're up there you have a machine gun and you have rifle pits and things like that. And, you know, you just never know when something could happen. Yeah. But the whole time I was there, I have 2 stories about that. That's, you know, they're sort of funny. You know, you're on guard duty, you have shifts. And of course, the twilight time in the morning is the worst. That's when they supposedly attack. Mm-hmm. You're half asleep, you know, the sun's starting to come up. And I looked out across the field and I saw giant butterflies going across the field. Giant butterflies. And I looked out, I looked again, and what it was, the Vietnamese were stealing, you know what a piece of tin's like, a long piece? Yeah. They had it over the head running, and the thing was flopping. And there was 3 of them running with that tin across, stealing it. And I caught him, I says, hey, Sarge, there's some people out there stealing tin. And, you know, he told me, well, shoot them. So I said, nah, just let them go, not just let them go.
Yeah. Yeah.
The other story is at night, we're on the guard duty, and I wasn't on the top. This friend of mine was, Randy Cooper. He was on the top, and I was in one of the fire pits, and another guy was asleep. And that's what you did. You rotated, so you wouldn't have to stay awake all night long. So we're sitting there, and all of a sudden we hear, whoop. And we looked over at Randy Cooper, and about 2 foot from him was this long tube, about this long, laying on the ground where it had fallen out of the sky. And we immediately thought rocket, because that's what they would shoot at us, 122 mil. They would shoot, there was so much in that, they'd have to shoot a rocket, a 22 millimeter rocket to hit us.
Yeah.
We thought it was a rocket that had landed and didn't go off. So we all jumped off and jumped in our pits and cowered for a few minutes. And then we sort of looked at it, and out the end of it was this cloth halfway pulled out. A parachute flare. They dropped it out of a helicopter, didn't open up. It was a magnesium flare. See, they would drop them and the parachute would come out. It would float down and light up the whole. Well, this one fell. And if it had gone off when it hit the ground, he would have been crispy critters.
Yeah.
But that's my 2 stories about, But a lot of guard duty.
Yeah.
And then on shift. Guard duty, shift. And then R&R.
Well, tell us about R&R.
Well, that's another story.
What you want to tell us?
Well, I'd never been anywhere except and the R&R places they were sending people to were Japan, Thailand, Hong Kong, or Australia. That was the main ones.
Uh-huh.
And so I, you just put your name on the list, and whatever you got, you got. So I got mine in January of '70 to Japan. And so we flew over, and it was 120 degrees in Vietnam, T-shirts, something like that. Got them. Do you know what the weather's like in Japan in January?
Cold.
I looked off the airplane. They had this big pile of field jackets down there. I said, what is that for? Went down the steps, and I picked up 2 field jackets and put them on. Stumbled over, you know what I mean? And, I didn't realize the weather was like that, Yeah. So so when I went to Japan, I went to Yokohama, and I had, probably $200, something like that. So I spent some time in Yokohama doing what 20-year-old boys do, or 21. I was 21 then. And then when it got down to it, I had about $70 left. I bought a camera. Used, a Japanese camera. That's what everybody wanted. I bought a used camera, and then I went back, again. And then one time, about 2 or 3 months later, I got another R&R, which was a mistake. So I said, okay, should I go or not? All the guys said, go ahead, take it. Just go ahead and take it. But then I got down to the Saigon, and they looked at my stamp. Says, you're off. So I just took a few days off in Saigon. And I did something bad. This is bad. I still remember it to this day. I'm wandering around the big Air Force base, Tonsanut, I guess it was.
Yeah.
Everything you can think of. Big PX, places to get food. This is one where we were at Fubai. The only Coke you could get was, I can't remember what it is. It's a grapefruit soda. That's all we could get. We couldn't get Coke, and it tasted terrible, but that's all we could get, no Coke. So we could get Coke. And I was walking around, and this Vietnamese Jeep pulled up next to me, and they said, do you need a ride? Yeah, I'll take a ride. So I took a ride with these officers and enlisted Vietnamese guys. Of course, they wanted me to do something for them. They wanted to give me some piastre. No, they wanted to give me something, some piastre and a few MPC, and they wanted me to go buy sodas for them because they couldn't do it.
Yeah.
So I was scared to death because it's black market and you can be in a lot of trouble. So I went in the front door of the PX and then went out the back and never bought it.
Yeah.
I felt bad about it. But if they'd have caught me doing that, it would have been,
Yeah.
it'd have been some, I'd have been busted in rank and all that.
Yeah.
So I didn't do it. So there's somewhere 50 years ago, from that, there's some guys running around still looking for me. Well, it was scary, you know what I mean? I was scared.
Yeah.
Because I had just ripped off a bunch of guys, and that was my story.
Yeah.
But, on getting rank, I arrived there as a PFC Ledford in June. In August, I was Spec 4 Ledford, Specialist 4th Class. In January, I was Specialist 5 Ledford, E5. So, the rank was good for me in Vietnam. It just 1, 2, 3.
Yeah.
And I have a chart in here that shows the next, years weren't as kind as those years were for rank in the military.
So were you in Vietnam for the 12-month tour?
1 year.
1 year. Okay.
All the guys in my class, the whole class went. Okay. So I thought we'd be together. Well, some went to Pleiku, some went to the different agency or radio research companies. 509th Radio Research was the name of the company, brigade, and they had people all over Vietnam. They had people for each division, like this is the 1st Division, the 3rd Division, the 2nd Division, Each division had an A.S.A. company.
Okay.
Then you had the field stations that worked more directly with the N.S.A.
Yeah.
Everything we collected went back to the United States to be analyzed further on.
Okay.
There's still stuff sitting there they're trying to break. You know what I mean? Because it was, the breaking is not the easiest part.
Yeah.
But that's what I've read. There's still things sitting there that need to be broken.
Is there anything else about your first tour in Vietnam that you want to talk about?
Not really. It was, how many pictures I've got of Vietnam?
Oh,
somehow I just didn't take them. You know what I mean? I was so busy just living. Now, online now, they have guys that, did they do anything besides take pictures? You know what I mean? Because they have all the pictures that I never took. Sorry, I keep touching myself. But, they took all the pictures. They have all the pictures of the trench line. They have the pictures of the bunkers. They have the pictures of the girls that cleaned the hooches. They have the pictures of everything. And I have a picture of me standing next to a truck. And I just found another one that I sent to my mother. My mother just died recently, 95 years old. Oh, wow. She had all my letters that I had sent her when I was in Vietnam.
Good.
And of course, they looked like an idiot wrote them. They put me on guard. I had to do this. The food's
Yeah.
But but she kept all those letters,
That's
and
good.
it's. But I only had 2 pictures that I kept for Vietnam.
Yeah. Well, at some point, if you want to show them, you can as we move on. So when you return, talk about your return. Well, where did you go after Vietnam?
Didn't return home. My mother spins on that. Well, what it was, the Army Security Agency was all over the world.
Yeah.
Germany, they had people in Turkey. They had people all in these field stations, they called them. They would have the 05Hs, the guys copying the code, the 05Ds. They had these traffic analysts. They would analyze the traffic. They had people that could speak the languages. There was voice transmission. They spoke the language. So, being a young guy, wasn't married, and if you go to the States, to a stateside post, it's a lot of this.
Yeah.
And marching and going to the motor pool. I had no desire to do it. I had a job. I really enjoyed that Army Security Agent job. Yeah. It was a real job. I felt doing a real mission, and I didn't get shot. So I wanted to stay in the Far East because I wanted to see. So I put in for Thailand, Taiwan, and somewhere else, I think Okinawa. Well, I got orders to Taiwan, and that was a great assignment for the Army Security Agency. Me and another guy, Randy Berg, we'd gone through school together, we'd gone to Vietnam together, and we both got orders to Taiwan. Wow. We got on a little executive jet. Instead of getting on the big bird to go back, we got on a little executive jet with several other officers and stuff like that and flew from Vietnam to Taiwan wearing our jungle fatigues. you know. And then we got to Taipei, and then we got to a car picked us up and took us to Shilenko Air Station. It was an an air base has airplanes. An air station doesn't have airplanes. It was these Air Force guys copying China. We had a China mission.
Yeah.
Well, they were Red China back then.
Yeah.
And they were our enemy. So we were monitoring them just like,
Yeah.
But I got to Shilenko Air Station. They had I'll tell you this story. They had won the award for the best dining facility in the Air Force.
Really?
Chinese cooks.
Wow.
All the Chinese cooks were doing the cooking. Wow. We had our own room. We had, it was just the most beautiful duty you could think of.
Yeah.
But it got better for me. They didn't keep me there. They kept Randy Berg there. I went to Taichung, Taiwan, which is halfway down the island. There's 3 big cities, Taipei, Taichung, and Kaohsiung. Top of the island, middle of the island. Taichung was the Taiwanese capital of Taiwan.
Okay.
And so they had an Air Force base there called Ching Chuang Kong, CCK. And what it did, when the planes needed fuel, they would land there from Vietnam. Yeah. Planes would land in this Taichung airfield. And at the end of the runway, they had this little circle of antennas and a little building inside, and that's where us Army guys were. So you had, Shilenko Air Station up here, you had Taichung here, and you had Kaohsiung, you had a detachment.
Okay.
I was in detachment Charlie, this was detachment Alpha, I think Bravo was Kaohsiung. So when we did that DF to China, that was your 3, where the arrows would cross. Yeah. So that's what we did. We worked 8-hour shifts. We had an E7 in charge, no officers. We had about 15 guys. We had our own room, our own houseboy, our own cooks, no officers. Again, I'll say that. You know what I mean? All you had to do was go to work. You put your uniform on, you'd go to work, get off, come back. 8-hour shifts, nothing, none of this 12-hour stuff. And you were in a big city. Taichung was a big city, a lot of people. This is the way it was. I would go to a street, there would be 30,000 Chinese, black hair as far as you could see, and me. And, just a country boy. It was completely different, and I mean, it's just different.
What a great experience.
Oh, it just tremendous experience. And it just showed me a whole different world. Showed me a whole different world. And you'd had time off. We could go to Taipei. Back then, nobody had a car hardly at all. They were all riding motorcycles. If you wanted to buy a car over there, it was really expensive.
Yeah.
And we, so we could shop on post or, and things.
Yeah.
They had a downtown, they had a Navy compound. A lot of things, we had a lot of military on Taiwan back then.
Yeah.
When Jimmy Carter came in and said, no, we're going to be friends with China, they kicked us all out, back in the late mid-70s.
Yeah.
But then we had a lot of military there, and so it was just great duty. It would just shift work, and we got to travel and see places. The tallest Buddha in the world is at Chonghua, really tall Buddha. It's just, you just saw things you would never see. And we could drive. I had a Chinese driver's license, so we could drive, so we weren't stuck there. We had an Air Force truck, for duty. And we had 2 of them, and we had, just great food. Yeah. Oh, I could tell you my one story, how I knew I was in heaven. You could go in, and if you didn't like what the food, the cook says, you could say, I want a steak, or whatever you wanted. So at the end of the meal, he says, do you want some watermelon? Yeah, I'll take a piece of watermelon. So he come out with it. He had cut it up in little chunks and taken all the seeds out and gave it to me. I knew I was in heaven. I knew that my mother had never done that, chunks of watermelon with the seeds taken out. And now you can buy watermelon without them. Things have changed.
Yeah.
So I knew I was in heaven. What could I do to screw it up? What could I do to screw this up? I found the way. What do y'all think it is?
You volunteered for something?
Yeah, you can say that. I'm going to look this picture up because I think this is important. Yeah, I'll read what this says. I met John 10. By the way, John 10 means sweet. I was 22, she was 20. I fell like a rock. We got married on 3 August 1971. A good day's work, my aunts have told me. I'll be married 50 years August the 3rd.
Congratulations.
The only problem was my top secret clearance. Would the Army let me keep my job or not? I love my job and just enlisted for 6 years. I didn't realize what 6 and 4 is. What is 6 and 4? 10. So I was committed to 10 years in the Army, and I wasn't too crazy about it, So I had 10. But we got married, when I was there, I had met her,
Yeah.
22 years old.
Yeah. Yeah.
I'm going to say this out loud. She get mad at me if she ever reads this. A mini skirt, and I was 22.
Yeah. That says it all.
That says it all. But she's been the greatest wife I could have ever done.
Good.
Ever married. We got I'll get to that story later on. But so I had re-enlisted for 6 years, and I had re-enlisted for Homestead Air Force Base. They had a field station there for the Cuba. Cuba's right there.
Yeah.
That was a big deal, copying Cuba back then.
Yeah.
And so we went to Homestead, but they didn't take my top secret clearance. They took my access. So I couldn't do the job that I was.
Okay.
I could keep the clearance, but I couldn't do the job.
Right.
So we and we got to Homestead in September of 71.
Okay.
And so we waited almost a year for them to make a decision. And what the problem was, what was happening in 71, the war was winding down. Mm-hmm. They didn't need as many 05Ds as they used to need, And the Cold War was still going on, but they just didn't need as many as so they were letting people out. They said, oh, well, you're a cook now, or you're a clerk typist, or whatever. So for me, while I was there, actually, I got on orders to go back to Vietnam as an 05D. But because they were I didn't have the clearance, I didn't have to go. Oh. And I would have gone back to somewhere and done the same job, because they stayed there right to the end, doing what they were doing. Yeah. But I didn't have to go back because I had the clearance problem. And then finally they made a decision in September. Well, in 72 they made a decision. No, we're going to change you from 05D to 05F, which is a radio teletype operator. Okay. You could have a secret clearance or whatever,
right.
And we're going to send you, hold yourself for this, to Fort Riley, Kansas, to the 1st Infantry Division. See, I hadn't been in the real Army. And I was an E5, and I had been in the real Army. Yeah. No formations, none of that physical, none of that stuff. It was all mission. That was it. As long as you had your hair cut, you were okay. Yeah. No, this was the 1st Infantry Division, so I ended up in headquarters and headquarters battery, Division Artillery, Fort Riley, Kansas. So I did the message center, the Comcast, the crypto account where you kept all the, the secret devices to run radios, and so I did that for a while. I was a Spec 5. Well, they didn't need Spec 5 anymore, so they laterally promoted me to Buck Sergeant, E5. Which is no more pay, just, you're an NCO now. Yeah. Leader of men, not a technical guy. So I did that, and then I got sent to the rat rigs, the radio teletype. It's on the back of I got pictures.
What does rat rig mean?
Radio teletype rig. Okay. What it is, you'll have a transmitter, a receiver, 2 typewriters, and you can use the key, I guess, if you wanted to. Yeah. But what it is, like at a division or a brigade, you'll have a radio teletype rig instead of just, you'll follow that unit around, and if they want to send messages, paper copy, they'll, you know, you'll take the tape and put it in one machine, it'll run through and it'll go over the radio to another machine, print it out, then you'll tear it off and take it to the colonel, or something like that, you know. Radio teletype, rat rigs they call them. Those are all gone too. But, so here I was with 4 other E5s, each one of us had a rat rig or so, you know what I mean? And I said, oh my God. And every year, the 1st Division, guess what they do? You'll see the word reforger, return of forces to Germany. See, we had an agreement, you know, that we're gonna, if the Russians come or whoever comes, we're gonna go to Europe and, you know, fly over and stop them.
Yeah.
So 4 times when I was there from 72, 73, 74, 75, and 76. So every year they go to Germany and spend like 2 months, once in the field, and then the artillery units would go to Grafenwehr, Wildflicken, or Hornsfels and fire their cannons. Because all this equipment is pre-positioned in Europe, you know, to be ready for the Russians.
Yeah.
You know, so what happens is we couldn't fly our equipment over. We would just fly people over, give them this new equipment and say, here, Russians, chew on this for a while until we get, you know, the real soldiers over there, you know. And so we did that. So I would be home, you know, for a few months, and then we'd go to Germany again, then come back and then spend the whole year going on field exercises and with, you know, in a regular unit. And, so most time I was with the rat rig. We'd had these old vehicles, they call them gamma goats. Have you ever heard that word? Yeah. The gamma goat, that's what we had. It was something put out by Chrysler that means it'll sink if you try to swim it, you know. Yeah. It was the old equipment. So we'd have these gamma goats with the rat rigs, and we'd run all over the place. And then, so there was 5 or 6 of us. Then the E6 board came out, and guess who was the only guy out of the 5 who made E6?
You.
Yeah. I'd had a little college, you know what I mean? Yeah. And I'd gone to the school and did pretty good. So all these other guys didn't make the E6. And of course I stayed in the platoon to be the sergeant in charge of all 6 rat rigs. So I was popular, of course, you know. But, you know, but I wanted rank because I had a family that I wanted to, you know, rank meant more money. Yeah. Oh, you know what my first paycheck was?
What?
As an E1? $108. That's what I made. So I was rolling in the money back then. But I didn't have a wife and kid. Now when I was an E5, it was $300. Okay. A month. Okay, moving on. But so I made E6. Well, I was in this unit. I'd been there 4 or 5 years. This is the longest I'd ever been in. My wife was starting to think that Fort Riley was our home. You know what I mean? I said, "Oh Lord, Lona." It would freeze in the winter. I saw 50 below wind chill, and we were standing outside in formation. Does that tell you? 50 below wind chill, and we'd stand in formation. That's the kind of army it was. But I made E6, and then all of a sudden I got a nice little letter from the Department of Army that says, "Oh, we have too many E6 05 Charlies," which they had changed from 05F to 05 Charlies. "You are now a 31 Charlie." I said, "What is this?" And I had gone from being just a rat guy to a communications chief. That's what they called him, you know. I said, "Well, what is that?" And he says, "Well, you're moving next door to the 1st or the 2nd Infantry." All I did they were in our same motor pool, so I moved to headquarters and headquarters company, 1st or the 2nd Infantry. They were known as in Vietnam, they wore a black scarf because they'd killed a bunch of Viet Cong and took their pajamas, and they would wear them. I said, "Oh my God, I'm in an infantry unit now." So I'd gone from the Army security agent to a basic infantry mechanized unit. Yeah. I said, "Oh man, I didn't sign up for this." But, you know, I was a commo chief. You know, we'd run the wire all over the place for the switchboards. Yeah. You know, we had a rat rig. You know, we had we had the guys that would fix the telephones and things like that. They'd fix the radios, and I had a platoon of them. So I was the battalion commo chief for 1st of the 2nd Infantry. So when the colonel couldn't talk, he knew my name, you know what I mean? When his radio didn't work, when he picked up the phone and it didn't work, where's Sergeant you know.
Yeah.
So I did that for another year at Fort Riley and went on another reforger. So, you know, I said, this is it. I can't stay here any longer. And I'll tell you all a funny story. It was really funny. So, you have a battalion NCO or a battalion on the weekends. You have a battalion officer and a battalion NCO that answers the phone. So if there's any problems, they take the call, they pass it down to the companies. So you're sitting in the battalion headquarters Saturday and Sunday when everybody else is off. So what are you going to do? You're going to snoop around a little bit. You're going to look in the inboxes. You're going to just see what's going on. I looked in this inbox and picked it up, and there was orders for Robert B. Ledford to go to Germany. I hadn't got them yet. So I learned a lesson. I'll never look in somebody's inbox again. But there was orders with my name. They just hadn't handed them to me yet. So that was my introduction to go to Germany. And I went home and told my wife. I made a copy while I was there, you know, because they gave them to me next week. And I was on the way to Germany. And guess when they had to have me in Germany? Guess a day.
Christmas.
15 December.
15.
They wanted me to be in Germany on 15 December. I says, wait a minute. Can't you just let me go home for Christmas? No. They need you. They need you, you know. This is why you got to go. I had to convince my mother and my wife that I had to be in Germany on 15 December. Why? So here it is, December of '76. I trudge off to Germany. I go to, I landed Germany. Then I go to headquarters and headquarters battery, 1st of the 81st Field Artillery. So you're thinking artillery, Pershing missiles.
Wow.
Pershing missiles. See what it was. You remember a few years ago, the START Treaty?
Yes.
Trump says we're not going to follow the START Treaty because the Russians are putting missiles everywhere, right? Well, before the START Treaty, back in we used to have nuclear missiles in Germany on carriers that would go around and hide in the woods. And that's what I went to. That was one of the batteries, the headquarters battery. You had an A, B, C, D of nuclear missiles. And you can move them around from different wooded areas to another one. So that was the trick. You didn't want the Russians to know where they were, so they'd immediately, you know. And we had what we call the Pershing II back then. They used to have the Pershing I, then it was the Pershing II. But when you communicate in a nuclear environment, it makes all kind of problems. You know, the signals get messed up and things like that. So I had a 50-man platoon. And I got there on December the 15th. And they looked at me and said, who are you? I said, I'm Sergeant Ledford. I'm signed here. They didn't know I was coming. They didn't give a rat's petunia that I was coming. They didn't. And it was an E8 slot, and I was an E6. But they put me in it, you know what I mean? 50 men men and women I was in charge of. But they didn't know I was coming. So here I am, there on Christmas, sitting, you know, eating in the mess hall and things like that. Then it got to, and then my wife and my daughter at this time, you know, she was born at Homestead Air Force Base, Tracy. She's 49 now. Tracy, that was our one daughter. The only daughter we had, the only kid we had. She graduated from Georgia Tech. You know, my wife did a fantastic job raising her. But so I was sitting there. It was on a Sunday. They were having some trouble with the switchboard, and I went to the switchboard, and we were messing around with it, and it got a ring, and the guy says, Sergeant Ledford, this is for you. And I said, what? Took the phone. They'd called me. My father had died. You know, he was 52 or 53 years old. He had come back from Colorado to spend time with his mother, sitting in the house watching TV, and just died. So here my father died at 52. So they said, well, you got to go home. So I was going to go to the funeral, you know. So I flew all the way back to the States, spent some time with my wife. She was staying with my grandparents that I'd lived with.
Okay.
You know, they were, and my mother. And that from the minute they met my wife, they loved her.
Good.
She was such a good person, you know what I mean? They taught her how to quilt.
Oh.
They taught her how to eat Southern food, you know what I mean? Cook, you know, just, they
Yeah.
loved my wife better than they loved me.
Yeah.
She's just that good of a wife. But, so here I go back to my father, and then I go back to Germany after a few days. And then finally, because a lot of times your wife can't go with you because there's no place for them to live.
Yeah.
You finally have to get quarters. So finally, I brought her and my wife over, and we left the dog, Frenchie. We had got no, that's another story. But we, went to Germany, and we set up. We got the temporary quarters. They put you in a temporary quarter, so we had all our furniture delivered to temporary quarters. And then once you're in temporary, you got to wait to get permanent, so they packed everything up again and sent us to live in the German housing. They had a German housing place, an apartment. And then we lived there for, I guess, a year and a half. And as I said before, I was an E6, junior NCO still, but I was working an E8 position. So
Yeah.
when you want promotion, you always want to work a higher position.
Yeah.
So I did that, but all of a sudden an E7 came in, and they said, well, where are we going to put Sergeant Ledford now? They found an E5 slot somewhere and stuck me in it, And of course, with a guy with a big ego, you want to be promoted.
Yeah.
Do you want to be in an E5 position to make E7? No.
Yeah.
So I started bitching, raising hell. I wanted to go somewhere in the brigade where there was a slot for me, not just a hand-me-down job. Never bitch. I got orders for 3rd Infantry Division,
Okay.
2nd of the 30th Infantry, Schweinfurt, Germany. So, so I went to, out of the pot right into the fire again in an infantry unit. And this was mechanized infantry. And I was the battalion commo chief. It was an E7 slot. I was an E6. So I said, well, I'll just take it. I'll grit it. Because it was a fairly good unit, you know what I mean? But our job, in in the Cold War, we were there to stop the Russians from coming, right?
Yeah, right.
So the 1st Division was back in the States. Well, the 3rd Division was in Europe. They're the ones that are going to have to bear, with NATO, are going to have to, if they had come, they're the ones that are going to have to get in there and try to stop them. Do you know what we practiced doing all the time? Retreating across the Rhine River and saying, we're going to hold them here. Because we were on the other side towards the borders. See, they had the cavalry units up there because they can either stop them or get out.
Yeah.
But our infantry unit, if we couldn't stop them, we were going to go across the Rhine River and try to stop them.
Wow.
And that's what we did the whole time, was practice that kind of stuff. Oh, and have you ever heard the name Barry R. McCaffrey? Drug czar for Clinton. First drug czar. I was in the 2nd headquarters bed, and the XO was Barry R. McCaffrey. He was in the Vietnam War, got wounded, and he was our XO.
Okay.
But he made colonel while I was there, and he became the battalion commander. And later on, he was a 4-star general, and he was Clinton's first drug lord, drug czar, one of the first ones. So that was the only person that I've known that's ever gone up like that. Yeah. But it was a good unit. I enjoyed it, you know what I mean? But it was infantry, and it was hard, charging, PT every morning.
Now, what year was this, just to get a timeline?
I left the States in 76, got to, to the 81st in 77, 78.
Okay.
78, I got to the 2nd of the 30th Infantry.
Okay.
So now we're in the peacetime army. The Vietnam's completely over. If you order a part for your truck, you might get it or not.
Yeah.
The money has dried up in the military.
Yeah.
We're at peace.
Yeah.
It just the military didn't have big budgets and all like
Right.
that.
Yeah.
So it was so I got to 2nd and 30th in 78. I stayed there and re-enlisted. I'm not re-enlisted. I'd re-enlisted. Oh yeah, I'm 87.
Oh.
See, I'd worked all those jobs
Yeah,
that were
yeah.
in 78. I'm 87 in 78. And so that was Sergeant First Class. So I left. So we stayed there 78, 79, and part of 80. I extended 6 months so my daughter could finish school. We don't, you try to work it out where you don't go, you go
Yeah.
in the summer.
Yeah.
Not always easy to do, but yeah, that's what you try for.
Yeah.
So I got orders to go to Fort Ord, California. I says, okay, we're finally going to do something different. Headquarters, 2nd of the 32nd Infantry. Another infantry unit. And I said, Bob, what have you done? Who have you pissed off? There's engineers, there's all kind of things that have communications. Why do I got to go to the infantry units? So I went to this unit at Fort Ord, California, and that's before they've closed the place now. That's something about the military I'll talk about in a minute. You think the military, they close places all the time. They're gone. They just vanish, But going on. So I got to the headquarters and headquarters company, 2nd and 30th Infantry, leg infantry. It's not, there's no jeeps. There are a few jeeps.
Yeah.
There are just a few jeeps, and most, they walk everywhere in the sand on Fort Ord. And they go to the training area at Fort Irwin, California, the high desert. And what it's like is during the day it's 110. The sun goes down and you say, where's my field jacket? It turns freezing cold, and then the sun comes up and you're burning up. And you're in the dust and the sand. So we'd go train in that. See what they do, they rotate units to this training area to get ready for war. And it's one of the most miserable places you can think of for a post. So I did this with that infantry unit. And I said, there's got to be something else. I got to, because I wanted to make E8 by then. I had been 78, so it's 1980. Let me see. No. 80, yeah, 80. So I was getting to where I wanted to make E8. And I wasn't going to doing this same job over and over again. I wanted something different. So I put in to go to the Signal Corps. I was in the Signal Corps, but not in the good Signal Corps. I wanted to be in the Signal Corps where you had big vans with air conditioners and that kind of thing. Because I was getting to be in my 30s, mid 30s, and I wanted something a little bit better. So I put in to go to the Signal Corps, and I became what's called a 31 Zulu, from 31 Charlie to 31 Zulu, which is area communications chief. Okay. And so I went to the 127th Signal. Each battalion, like this unit would be the 121 Signal, and then there's the 123rd for the 3rd Division.
Okay.
So you had 127th Signal was in Fort Ord, 7th Division.
Okay.
So I became a cable platoon sergeant, and cable platoon, back then they had microwave. That was the big thing. You had satellites, but it wasn't that, good yet.
Yeah.
You had microwave. So they would send a microwave cable from one division to the other, and then it would run from cable down to these big switchboard vans, might be miles of cable. So the guys that I had, we called them cable dogs. Does that tell you anything?
Yeah.
They were cable dogs. They were the roughest, toughest, big reels and things like that. They would lay cable for miles and miles, and they'd get it all laid out, and then a tank would go through in the middle of the night, tear it up, and I'd have to go wake them up after they'd been up all day, saying, you got to go out. So it was, but that's what I'd asked for. So I did that for another year. And then, I knew I was going to get orders for Korea. That's what generally happens. You stay in long enough, you'll end up in Korea because it's a big place, and and a lot of times it's no wife. You can't take them with you. And I got orders for Germany, so I lucked out.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? I could have, where I could take my wife and kids. See, I never had a hardship assignment. Some guys can have them back to back and be gone from their wives for a year.
Yeah.
But the longest we'd ever been separated was 4 months waiting to go to Germany.
That's good.
So I lucked out, really.
Yeah.
And we got orders, and we love Germany. It's a beautiful country, beautiful.
Did you have a chance to travel around with your wife?
We went all over the place. We went to Switzerland, France. My mother came over with a sister. We went to France. Went to London, Luxembourg, you know, Brussels. If I was going to be a rich man, I'd like to be a rich German. You know what I mean? You just love that country.
Yeah.
You know, we'd save money over there and come to the States and spend it. You know what I mean? But Germany is such a civilized, clean. It's just amazing. We fought 2 wars with Germany. They're nicest people. Nicest people. And so I got orders to go back to Germany. So my wife stayed in the States again because we didn't have quarters. So I get over there and they send me to the 72nd Signal Battalion in Karlsruhe, Germany, which is, if you know Germany, you got Frankfurt up here, Stuttgart over here. Right next to the French border is Karlsruhe. It used to be part of France, then part of Germany. Part of France, Strasbourg, you know what I mean? The Germans would, the French would, you know, pass it back and forth. Karlsruhe is a beautiful city, loved it. You know, my daughter was 7 or 8 years old. We could put her on the trolley with her friends. They'd go downtown and run around. At 7 or 8 years old, that's how, you know, you felt about Germany. It didn't feel dangerous to you. And they loved it, you know. My wife, So we were in Karlsruhe in the 72nd Signal Battalion. I was there, it's like what they call echelons above corps. So I had rat rigs, I had all the communications gear scattered all over the place. And when we would go out, we would set up with the different divisions. So, you know, we were always on the road traveling around to visit this rat rig or this van or whatever. So I saw a lot of Germany. They have a picture of me coming out. You know what a Schnell in Biss is? Schnell in Biss. Schnell means fast, and Biss is some kind of restaurant. Along the road they'd have these little vans with the window open, and you'd go there and get what they call a Schaschlik, which is meat with a stick and gravy and a drink. And I'd come out with a big smile on my face. They took a picture because we'd travel around, eat on the road, you know, just little of these beer, you know, little beer places to eat. Food was great, you know. So we did that, and I think I had my first female lieutenant, you know, which is the big thing. See, the Army, this is getting into the 80s. So the female presence is getting a lot more than what it used to be. I've had female soldiers, but never an officer. And then sometime in the early 80s, we had my first second lieutenant, Susan Alexander, I think her name was. The problem is she had married an E6 in another unit, which is enlisted, so they jumped her out and threw her under our unit. So she was coming with a little baggage there. That was a bad thing back then for enlisted and then to be married. So, but she was a great officer, you know, she put up with me and, you know, we handled it. But we were there, I think we were in Karlsruhe for like 2.5 years. And I thought, well, this is great, I'll just finish the dude. And then one day I heard a little rumor about the 63rd Signal Battalion. And I said, well, you know, what's going on? He said, oh, we're splitting part of our unit off to start this unit over here. And this was in '84. And I says, well, you know, okay, sounds all right to me. Next thing you know, my platoon was the one that was going and everybody else was staying. So what happens is I got transferred 20 miles to another concern, Germersheim, and I'd been there before actually. When on Reforger, when when they ship you over there, you go to where all the equipment is stored in Germersheim. I had been there before to pick up new equipment, and that's where they had stored it, but this is where they started B Company, 63rd Signal Battalion. On that post, they'd started it. So we went over there and just drove over there with our equipment, got inside, and I said, well, where's, the first sergeant? They said, oh, he started to leave. You're the first sergeant.
Wow.
So, you know what I mean? So we were over there, and I says, I was throwing people in rooms and things like that, and the guy came out and says, Sergeant Ledford, where's the toilet paper?
Oh, no.
When you start a new unit, you have to have a number. Every unit has a number. We didn't have a number.
Oh.
We couldn't get anything, you know what I mean? We had to go back to the old company and borrow sheets, borrow just everything. because they were in such a rush to throw us out there. They didn't set up the unit. And I was the first sergeant for that whole 2 or 3 weeks while the guy was on leave. I could have killed him. You know what I mean? That's just what happens when you get a little bit higher in rank.
Yeah.
You see how screwed up the Army can be, you know what I mean? So we were out there, just couldn't get toilet paper, couldn't get anything. But we survived it.
Yeah.
And I was there for a year, but you know, with Susan Alexander, Sharon Alexander. And I was waiting for orders. I thought, yeah, it's about time, because in Germany you should stay 2 or 3 years, you know. And then guess what? I come out on the E8 list. So it was from 78. Yeah, I'm 87 and 78. So in 84, so from 78 to 84, I came out on the E8 list, which is pretty good, you know what I mean? So usually when you have a 20-year career, if you can make E8, you haven't screwed it up too bad, you know. So I was Master Sergeant Ledford, and I finally got a desk job. They sent me to Fort Gordon, Georgia, and Fort Gordon, Georgia was and I got a desk job. I was in the Office of Combat Development, and I was doing BOIPs. You know, basic, I can't remember what the words stand for now. See, when the Army develops a new piece of equipment, and they said, well, how many people are going to operate this equipment? You have to do a study to find out if you need 3 people, 4 people. How many do you need? Or if you're going to start a new unit, how many people are you going to have? And, you know, they have people that do that. They're civilians that do that, but we have military people with them. That means I have a desk job, no formations, no anything. You know what I mean? I just show up for work, wearing my uniform with my Master Sergeant pins on. And, you know, I just did a job. You know, it was a job. No privates to worry about, you know, none of the things that you would think. So I did that for almost 3 years. Because I thought that was my reward for putting up with 3 infantry units. You know, I was almost 40. I was 38 or so. And I thought, you know, sleeping in a tent had no appeal to me anymore. So, as I was talking in the book here, you know, I was a Master Sergeant. Oh, I started going to college. I had a 2-year degree when somewhere along the line, I got a 2-year degree. Just taking classes. When I got to Fort Gordon, I started a bachelor's degree with Southern Illinois University in electronics management, because I wanted to make E9, Master Sergeant Major. And I knew I hadn't been a first sergeant yet, so I needed something. I knew I needed an education, you know. I knew I needed it. So I started, and so I went for 2 years every Saturday and Sunday, all day, to Southern Illinois University, and I got a bachelor's degree in electronics management. So I said, okay, Bob, you're ready for E9 now. It's going to get to the, you know, to the board. They're going to see me. I'm slim and trim. Of course, I was fighting the weight problem. You know what I mean? Because you get, you know, you can eat, but you're not doing the infantry stuff anymore. You can. The Army was hard on that in the 80s. They were looking for ways to throw people out. They had too many, so they were looking for ways to throw. If it used to be you could get a DUI, don't drink again, Sarge. Okay, now you get a DUI, boom, you're out. See, because they had too many people in the 80s. We weren't at war yet. You know what I mean? The Cold War was winding down. We just didn't need as big of an army as we did. So they were throwing people out left and right for stupid stuff. But I kept my weight down by going to a gym and had this lady teaching me how to do all the exercises back in the 80s, you know how it is. But so I stayed under the weight. I was trying to get myself, but I had some more GI money, you know, for the education. So I started a master's program with Georgia Southern University. Public administration, you know, government management. And I finished it because I was going Tuesdays and Thursdays at night for nearly a year and a half. And I just about finished it when I came up time to make a decide to, you know, re-enlist or not. While I was doing all this, we had bought our first house in Augusta, Georgia, $70,000.
Yeah.
At 11% interest.
Yeah.
That's, you know, in 1980, that's what it was, 85.
Yeah.
So we bought our first house. My wife she had moved with me 12 times. So, you know,
Yeah.
that was put up with a lot, you know.
Yeah.
Losing her job. She had a job almost the whole time. She had to quit her job, follow me. So we had our first house. My daughter was just getting ready to start high school. So I had a decision to make. I knew I was going to make E9 if I'd have just hung in there, because I was, like I say, educated.
Yeah.
I had a good record, had the stripes, and I had the, you know,
Yeah.
I could have done it. I chickened out and
Yeah.
says, I'm out. You know, 20 years was enough. I was 39 years old. I started thinking about drawing half pay and not doing no work. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Let's be honest. You know?
Yeah.
And so I retired in June of '88.
Okay.
I was looking for a job because it was about $1,000 after taxes. That's what I was bringing in for just, you know, being retired.
Right.
You know, not a great amount of money. A car payment and a house payment, maybe. You know.
Yeah.
But we had our house that we were paying off. My wife had her job. She had a job working for the Department of Army on the Army Hospital.
Okay.
She had worked since the daughter was 6 or 7 years old. She had worked all that time because Army pay was not enough to do the extra things you wanted to do. And so she worked the whole time. And so I retired. And then I started looking around and found out I wasn't as hot as I thought I was. Job. Because what was happening in the 80s, well, it was Bill Clinton, during the 80s, right?
Yeah.
He was kicking government employees out left and right. They had too many, he said.
Yeah.
He balanced the budget, I think. So, but he did that by slowing federal hiring down.
Yeah.
You couldn't get a federal job for anything. State, and what was my degree in? Public administration.
Yeah.
I couldn't get a job in federal. State, if you didn't know Billy Bob, you didn't get a job.
Yeah. Yeah.
And local government was even worse.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? So I looked and looked and looked, and finally I got a job with FEMA, Federal Emergency Management Agency. I worked for them in, don't laugh, Maynard, Massachusetts. And Bob, why would you take that? They made me a GM13, which was like 50 or 60,000 a year.
Oh.
For me, that was like gold mine.
Yeah.
I just didn't realize it was in Maynard, Massachusetts. So we went up there for a year or so, and my daughter got accepted at Georgia. She got accepted at Vanderbilt, 2 or 3 other, and got accepted at Georgia Tech to be an engineer. She wanted to be a chemical engineer.
Okay.
So here it is. Our daughter came back to Georgia, and here we are living in Massachusetts.
Yeah.
That lasted about 6 months, and my wife says, I don't care, we still had a house in Augusta, so we decided to come back to our house.
Yeah.
And I left that job, and I said, well, I should be able to get a job back in Augusta now that I got some federal experience. After I sent out about 150 of those forms, that the government jobs, they still weren't hiring that much, you know. And I didn't have any, disability. I didn't have any disability. I was in fairly good health, I thought.
Yeah.
So I didn't get any. You had to have 30% to even get a government job on post. So I don't laugh. I'll give anybody $5 if they can guess what I went into. A big, tough military man with a lot of electronics background. I bought a Mary Maid franchise. You know, the residential maid service?
Yeah.
Well, what it was, I went in '88, when I retired, I'd looked at them, and it was about $18,000 to start a franchise. There was none in Augusta. So I says, well, there's none in Augusta. There was something like the Cleaning Authority or something like that. I says, well, I don't want to do that. So when I was looking for a job and couldn't find one, I went to a job fair in Jacksonville, and the Mary Maids guy was sitting there, and this was in '92, I think. After I left FEMA, we came back, and in '92, I was still looking for that. But he said, "Well, why don't you think about a Mary Maids franchise?" So I took all the paperwork, went back home, And I was sort of depressed because I didn't have a job. My wife was working 2 jobs to put my daughter through college. 2 jobs. And I didn't have any. So I said, well, let's spend thousands of dollars buying a franchise to give me a job. And that's what we did. We bought we started the one in Augusta, Georgia. We ran it from 92 to 2016.
Gosh.
Guess who bought it? My CPA.
Really?
And why would a CPA buy a business? It made money.
Yeah.
When we would clean $20,000 a week in houses.
Jeez.
I had about 30 employees, you know, just running all over the place cleaning houses. Of course, it's a tough job.
Yeah.
Nobody thinks they want to clean houses. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
We would send out 1 or 2 people. I paid their mileage, paid their, you know, just whatever. They had to have workman's comp, the taxes, the cleaning supplies, the equipment. They used their own vehicles. We didn't have to buy a bunch of vehicles. But we could make, you know, gross $20,000 a week. And it'd be that's $1 million a year.
Yeah.
It was $1 million a year. Now, that didn't happen in that happened in 5 or 6 years. When we started out, it was tough.
Yeah.
But we built it up. And he bought the business because he'd been my CPA for 16 years. He knew the business was a good business. Bought it for his wife, and now they're doing $25,000 a week.
Well, you obviously did a heck of a job growing it and running it, managing.
It really started making money when my wife quit and came to work for us.
Okay. Yeah. Well, talk a little bit about how you think your military experience helped you be successful in that.
You know, I thought about that because, you know, you can't stand the women up in a formation and say, this is what we're going to do, blah, blah, blah.
Yeah.
You know.
Yeah.
It's just that, you know, military teaches you to be on time. I would do all the estimates for years. You know, I would drive to a lady's house that I've never met before.
Yeah.
And when I left, she would give me the key to her house, her credit card number.
Wow. Yeah.
That's how bad she didn't want to clean. No, you know what I mean? I had to learn how to talk. I don't know if you know it or not, I stutter bad.
Can't tell it.
Well, I couldn't say I couldn't say Porky Pig when I was younger.
Wow.
You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Pig.
Wow.
And the military knocked a little bit of it out of me.
Yeah.
You know, forward march, you got to learn how to say that.
Yeah.
Platoon halt, you got to learn.
Yeah.
You know, but I used to stutter really bad. And and Mary Maids helped me come out of it because I'd meet people, they'd just open the door and I'd meet them, you know. So you had to learn how to, and being on time.
Yeah.
If they want if they said I would like for you to my house at 10:30 to give me an estimate, if you were there at 10:35, you better have an excuse.
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
Yeah.
So the military taught me that.
Yeah.
Being on time. If you say you're going to do something, do it. Now, you know, when I tell the women they're going to have to clean this way, they're generally going to do what they want when they get to the house. But you got to have, you know, some kind of, and by buying a franchise, yes, I could have started my own business without a franchise, but I like to have a guideline what to go by.
Yeah.
And they for $20,000 they gave it to me. You know what I mean?
Well,
and then,
you obviously had tremendous people skills to be able to deal with them.
the women, you know, I got along with most of the 90%. There's 3 women that are still working there that, you know, they're working in the office. I hired them all, and they started cleaning houses, and now they had been with me 10 years when I left, you know. So I think I have a little bit of people skills, not the greatest, but the military taught me that. Not, you know, not working in the factory like I could have done. But the military taught me how to get along with people, and you know, 20 years is a long time though. But you know, I think I could have learned it in 3 and got out sometime.
Is there anything else you want to say about your post-military life and activities and family?
You know, I showed y'all the picture of my wife.
Yeah, and you could take a second if there's anything else you want to.
That's me in Vietnam.
Wow.
Skinny young boy.
Yeah.
You know.
Did you get it? Okay.
That's a picture of the house girl.
Okay.
Let me see if I can find a picture of my wife again. Yeah.
There we
See,
go.
that's the pictures of me and
Yeah.
on Taiwan.
By your face, yeah.
Yeah.
Back foot there.
Picture of me on Taiwan.
God.
My wife. Finding her was,
Yeah.
you ever hear about the guys that go to Murfreesboro to to Kansas to that crater and finding a diamond?
Yeah.
That's what I did.
Yeah, you obviously did.
My aunt says that was the best day's work I ever did.
Yeah.
She worked a job the whole time that I was, working in the military.
Boy.
Then she worked for the Department of the Army, Fort Gordon, for 20-something of the years. You know what I mean? Our child was the number 3 in her high school.
Gosh.
And didn't cause us any trouble. She went to Georgia Tech. She found out everybody at Georgia Tech is the number 3 in the high school. It took her 5 years to get through, but she met her husband there. He was a industrial engineer. He graduated. Now he's a senior vice president of the company. I have the 2 prettiest grandchildren a man could have walk in the face. They're 16 and 14.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? And it's all because of my wife. You know what I mean? It's not because Bob was a great father. I'm not. And it's because my wife was such a good mother and worked hard for our family. You know what I mean? The men are generally a product of good women.
I agree.
A lot of times they are. And my wife, I did not want to get up and go in some of those days to that Army job. I didn't want to get up and go in. She was the one that said, Bob, you got to go. You got to get up. And she would get me to get up and go in when I didn't really want to, And then she was the one that, well, like I say, she was working 2 jobs when I was starting this franchise and losing money like it was she bailed me out one time. I was in $10,000 worth of credit card debt. She found out about it. And she bailed me out of that, made me straighten up and bail me out of it. And made it so, and then, of course, I asked her one time, I says, Lorna, do you really love me? She said, Bob, I left my country, my family for you. And I felt about that big. So, if you run into a successful man in the military, there's generally a woman behind it somewhere, And I want the people at the Congress to know that, I'm a lucky man because of that. But I do want to tell you the reason I was going to save this. I watched TV in the 1950s and saw the last Confederate die. They had a picture of him in the bed and all that. Then I watched the last Spanish Civil War veteran die. Then I watched the last World War II veterans died. I just attended 200-year-old birthdays for 2 veterans that were World War II, 100 years old.
Yeah, wow.
And then I thought to myself, Bob, there's 810,000 veterans from Vietnam left out of 2-point-something of the million. So I wanted to do this so I could, put my 2 cents in, and tell people what it was like. I'm sorry I wasn't a long range, that's what a lot of guys say they are. They're LRRPs, long range reconnaissance, something other, special forces. Not everybody's that. But a lot of the people did, jobs that had to be done. And
well, I could tell one of your many good qualities is humility, because you did a lot more than you're taking credit for. I mean, what you did was just so valuable to those units that were out there in the trenches, and you were to a certain extent in the trenches. I mean, that guard duty, you could easily been hit with a mortar.
People got run over in Vietnam. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
I went to the wall, and there's a book up there where you can got names. There was 11 Ledfords there.
Really? Wow.
I'm so glad my name wasn't on that wall.
Yeah.
That was we went there for, they had one of these symposiums here I went to. And the reason, I remember that what the guy says was, our policy was to stop the communists in 3 places: Korea, Taiwan, Vietnam. We stopped them in Korea. They didn't go to Taiwan. we stopped them, but we just didn't finish it. You know what I
Yeah.
mean?
Yeah.
So because we were afraid communism was coming, and
Yeah.
it was.
Oh, yeah.
You know, let's be
Yeah.
honest, it was.
Yeah.
And it still could come back again to haunt us. It's this China thing that's going on.
Yeah, you're right.
I'm hoping we don't
Yeah.
start another one. It'd be crazy, but
Yeah.
every 20 years.
Do y'all have anything you would like to ask? Or
No, I think I'm good.
okay. Well, I want to give you one more chance if there's anything else you want to say, because it's been amazing hearing your story. But is there anything else you'd like to say before we?
No, I think I've said most of that. I think I could say, I was going to say, history, take care of yourself.
Yeah. Well, I can't tell you how much we appreciate you coming in here. I mean, your story is unique and inspiring to anybody that hears it. I mean, you grew up, let's face it, in a rural area. You didn't really know much about the world. You were just where you were. And look what you did in your life. I mean, you're obviously a patriot. You joined the Army. You had some ambition, but you not the kind of guy to step over people, the ambition, and it was rewarded. And the way you treated the people that you worked with obviously benefited you and benefited the Army. And some of your experiences are pretty amazing.
Well, I can say this, but going back to my wife is not an Anglo-Saxon
Yeah.
Protestant wife. She, came to the States, and Middle Tennessee it's a little,
Yeah.
but she was. I don't think she ever had maybe had one person say something snarky to her.
Good.
But she, has grown up around. She thinks she's Southern as can be now.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? And but when I go to Taiwan to visit her family, they treat me like a king.
Good.
You know what I mean? Loving people.
Yeah.
China, we think China's so complete. They're just people.
That's right.
They're just people like this. They're the nicest people. They ask about me every time they call. They treat me like a king. When we took the grandkids over, it was a wonderful experience. So even though the China is different or Russia's different, they're just generally all people. It's the governments that get things messed up.
Well, that's such a great message
Right.
that people will hear from what
I'm
you're
hoping
saying.
the future will hear that. You know
Yes.
what I mean? That let's not rush off to war.
Yeah.
Not unless we're really provoked hard, because we're still paying for some guy's little decision. Well, let's spray this stuff on these bushes and see what that
Yeah.
does.
Yeah.
One little stupid decision,
Yeah.
is affected.
That's so true.
You know.
Well, and you're to be credited for your ambition to get educated. I mean, as you said, you didn't do all that great in college, but you ended up getting your graduate degree. I
Right.
mean, that's a real credit to you for.
Well, my wife also says, "Bob, get up. You gotta go. You signed up. They're taking the money. You gotta go."
And you
I am
did.
so
And you
lazy.
did. It would have been
Right,
easy
right.
to say no.
You just said, "Screw it." Excuse me
Yeah.
for saying that.
Yeah, no, that's okay. And the way you built your business, I mean, it's just, it's an inspirational story to your family and us and anybody else that sees this. And again, thank you for doing this, and thank you for your service.
Well, thank you.
Thank you for your service and welcome home.